Welcome to Community Voices with your host, Terrence Lachey. This radio roundtable features community, business, and religious leaders that discuss current events and topics that impact our urban community. If you would like to be a guest or if you have a suggested topic, contact the station today at 616-259-7342. Now, into the program.
Hello, everybody. I have the esteemed pleasure once again to fill in for the great Pastor Lachey at Community Voices. I am Lee Stevens. A great opportunity to speak with you in the community and invite somebody in who I believe is all about the community. And we're going to dive into some important topics that involve the city of Grand Rapids. I believe a person of a great character, and we always look for that in our public servants, and he is that such. Been with us for quite some time now, by way of Austin, Texas beforehand, and he is our esteemed, not only community leader, pastor here as well, my fraternity brother, Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated, but he is serving under the title of City Manager for the city of Grand Rapids. I am talking to none other than Mr. Mark Washington. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, great to have you. First of all, I think anybody who knows, and you don't have to be under the cloth of the Lord serving in that capacity to be a great servant. You just have to have that great heart, and I believe guided by the Holy Spirit. Have the Lord's hand on your heart in every decision you make, because you are affecting other people. But it doesn't hurt to also be in the cloth and also serving as a servant to the community in a broader spectrum and stuff. So is that a daily conviction for you?
Well, as you exercise the call of city manager, and to me, that's where I begin with. It's not just a job for me. I believe it's a calling, and having been in ministry for a long time, I've while I served as assistant city manager in Austin and executive in Fort Worth, this is my going on 28th year in local government, 28 years. I have always had this bivocational focus where I've done ministry, both formally in the church as an ordained minister, but also viewed my role as a public servant as an extension of ministry, and have approached even this role while I am not a pastor of a community, of a church. I view my role as city manager as still a servant leader, and having the responsibility of the 200,000 residents in our community to serve them and have that privilege. And so, yeah, it is very humbling, and it is something that I believe that I'm called to do and not just paid to do.
Yeah. So let's get right to it, because we have a few topics that we want to motor through and get your feedback on and some perspective, because one of the things we want to do with this platform is to, and we've done it before in other capacities, we want people to know what is going on with their city. Let's just not focus in on what your daily is from, job or work, going back and forth from home and everything. There's a lot of stuff in between that's important for everybody to get engaged with and stuff. From your perspective, because you've been here for quite some time, are you astounded by the growth that has happened in Grand Rapids? And do you feel that the city has reached a point where there is, it's starting to maintain, or is there more levels to reach in the city of Grand Rapids?
Yeah. No, definitely. We have been very fortunate, unlike many other cities in the state of Michigan that's experienced population decline. Grand Rapids, since 2010 to 2020, the past census, we've grown almost 6%, had a 6% increase in population. Everything else is growing. The number of residents, the number of businesses, the diversity in our community, but also with growth, there are challenges. There's challenges around making sure we have housing. There's challenges around inclusivity as the diversity of our community grows and making sure there's equitable economic opportunity. But I think the best is still yet to come because there is so much potential. And prior to me coming here, as you mentioned, I came from Austin. And when I arrived, I was in Austin, left assistant city manager. I was there almost 10 years, and we grew from a community of roughly 700,000 to 1 million over a 10-year period.
10 years.
And so that's 300,000. That's the size of another city
Right.
itself. And while the rate of growth may not be as rapid as what was experienced in Austin, I do think because of the identity, the brand that we have in Grand Rapids in terms of its reputation, its increasingly popular reputation among both Michiganders and people in the Midwest, I do think there's going to be a lot more growth. And it's my job to make sure that there is smart growth in the city. And one of the things that you can look at other cities that grew too fast, they started experiencing decline. It wasn't smart growth. There was gentrification in the growth. They started pricing people out of the city. It became extremely unaffordable. San Francisco, LA, et cetera. And so I think our challenge is how do we make sure that growth occurs responsibly? And we don't have a lot of green space like other cities just to build new subdivision, new neighborhoods, out of cornfields and the green fields, cornfields into new developments. And so a lot of the growth that happens here within the city is redevelopment. And so density will be the formula for allowing growth to occur. And what we want the opportunity for the growth and the density is more so within the downtown areas. Within the neighborhoods, there are opportunities for infill housing, for redevelopment. And we can talk a little bit more about the city's efforts to land bank properties and make sure that as they're redeveloped, they're done in a very affordable way for housing, but also that all the growth can't happen in Grand Rapids by itself. The county has to grow. And with the challenges that we're seeing in some of our neighboring counties now, Grand Rapids is all in. We're committed to making sure that we value diversity, equity, and inclusion and give people an opportunity to prosper. And I think the Kent County government is equally committed. And so we have to make sure that with that understanding, that as the growth occurs in a center city and inner city, those same opportunities for affordability, for density has to happen in the suburbs.
It has to happen in the suburbs.
And that's a hard conversation sometimes for some of those cities and townships that they, there's some residents who don't like that kind of density and growth because they think it brings other challenges to their community. But I think, to go back to your question, that there's tremendous opportunity for us to continue to grow as a city.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered what my next question was. So in that challenge, because as you stated, there's not a lot of green space, and so this redevelopment is going to be key. Is chiefly the growth in the city of Grand Rapids outside of just the greater Kent County? Is the growth in what is provided to residents? Is it going to be more investment into that? Because as a real estate agent too, I can't sell somebody on land that's not there and stuff to build if they want to build something affordable. It's few and far between. So is it necessarily just housing? Is it the services that is provided?
Yeah. As a city grows, in terms of residents, the demand for services are going to increase. The demand for more accessible transportation increases. The demands for more community amenities like parkland. Make sure that as you put a lot of people in the area, that you have accessible and walkable parks, the water service and water demands, and all of those municipal services, even for police and fire. We recognize as we continue to grow that there are some parts of our city, particularly here on the southeast side, where we may have to build more fire stations to make sure that they can service our community as the footprint of our community continues to expand.
So job growth is gonna happen. Sounds like it's gonna happen.
Of course, job growth is going to happen, and it's a matter of, number one, where are the jobs? Are these regional jobs that are in the area that will require people to have accessible transportation to get to the jobs,
Correct.
or are there jobs that are going to be coming in the city? Obviously, large manufacturing jobs, plants, we don't have green space to build big, robust plants, and we want as many as we can, but we work with our partners to make sure if there's a regional project, like the battery plant that's being built in Big Rapids, that's going to be something good for the region that will have a trickle-down impact.
Yes.
Because there will be suppliers that will be able to help to build products and contractors for that plant that's going to happen in Big Rapids. But there will be people who have there'll be new jobs there, but they'll be transportation challenged to get to it. Yeah. And so what we want to do is bring those jobs to the area where possible.
Are we talking rail? Because then you can really get me started, because I love rail.
Well, in many communities, you have multimodal transportation. We do have train, but those are not, rail trains. They're passenger trains to Chicago and Detroit, and that serves a very good purpose. But we have to look at as many modes of transportation as possible. And the Rapid has been our regional partner with transit. And matter of fact, Austin just passed a huge bond. I can't remember the dollar amount, but a multi-million dollar bond to help with the growth of accessibility in terms of transit. But that is something that has been discussed here. I'm not sure bus service has been our focus in the area. We've done some micro-mobility stuff with scooters and bikes. Yes. We have talked about, because our city's only 40 so square miles, it's not like it's 300 miles and you got to get across a huge mass of land. Even having car to go, where you can have those kind of bike share and scooter share, that you can have cars in certain parts of our city where people can check in and out, and we're talking about piloting that as well in the future. So we recognize that that's an opportunity. But going back to the earlier question about development, one of the things, when you have a city that for the most part is an already built out city, and so when you have to redevelop either for housing or for business, et cetera, that takes an investment. And if it's older properties, historic properties, or there were old industrial or manufactured properties with all the environmental requirements, you have to have a lot of remediation. So you may get a property, for example, that may be $150,000, but that's not your moving cost, because you might have a lot of abatement and environmental remediation for that property versus commercial or residential. So what helps in a redevelopment community is to have incentives and tools, either provided by the state or federal government, that allows for some cleanup of the sites, contamination, getting you up to current standard and code, and that takes a lot of the cost of development out. And we've had to leverage those tools for some of the commercial projects, and for the residential projects, we've had to use some of the state tax credit around LIHTC and other things to help in making more affordability. Yeah,
you guys have been. I've been around real estate for quite some time, and the level of effort that comes just from the city itself, and then everybody rallying around that, is incredible. I have not seen in quite some time. So I have to give it up to the leadership, yourself, and the entire city administration for every single thing that you guys are doing to make it happen. And I stress to people, because these things, they take time.
Yeah.
Remediation and environmentals and stuff. Let me tell you, that alone can take a year.
Yeah. And you're right. And so a lot of growth happens intentionally. It's planned. And there are community plans that are set out 20 years in advance. And there's the master plan. We're going through a process now. And in years past, what we're doing differently is that we're trying to make sure that there is a lot of inclusion from different voices, and not just developers, not just municipal or public administrators involved in the master plan, but there's really community voice. So there's a 50-member task force that is as reflective in terms of the diversity of our city that there's never been before in this process. So you have a 20-year plan. You have we have capital plans for infrastructure, for how we're going to improve streets, how we're going to improve water and water service, and those are 5-year capital plans. Where we're going to build, we got a plan right now to redevelop the Martin Luther King Center here, Martin Luther King Community Center here on the southeast side, and redevelop that area. There's a lot of discussion about being more intentional in the third ward. And I think one of the things that's happened in the city is transition in elected leadership. And you have a new third ward commissioner with Kelsey Perdue coming in, and Sunita Lanier, former commissioner, one of the first African-American female commissioner serve on the city commission, leaving. But what the indelible mark that they left was to be very intentional about investment in the third ward and the third ward equity fund that could help small businesses and help to stimulate other development projects. And so, the challenge is there's always going to be business opportunities, and you may have heard a lot about the focus on redeveloping around the river and the amphitheater and some of those things. But we have to be more intentional, because there's a part of our community where this radio station is based in Third Ward that doesn't touch the river.
Doesn't touch it, yeah.
And so people are asking what else can be done to help with projects in the Third Ward, and with the Southtown Sid and others, helping to increase that intentionality and focus, and bringing projects to Third Ward. That is a very, very important opportunity.
Yeah, I'm just and I was accused that we're getting close already. We just hit on some stuff. I feel like we should make this a part 2. You good with it, honey? We got a few more minutes, but I think we should just make this a part 2. We should do a part. This is part 1 right now. We're going to do part 2 because we have a lot of other stuff that we want to get into, and he has allotted us a lot of time, and we want to grab that time while you're here. Yep. Just to pivot before we get back into some redevelopment stuff, and then we'll talk about some other issues. You talked about MLK on the 15th, Sunday the 15th. You're going to be the keynote for celebrating MLK Day. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. A couple of things. First of all, my career in public service started in January 15th in 1995.
Okay, yeah.
And so that was Martin Luther King Day. That was my first day at work at the city of Fort Worth. And it always has impressed upon me to make sure that my service is reflective of some of the values that Dr. King taught. In addition to that, he's a member of a great fraternity, as you know.
Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Thank you very much. All right, there we
go. And just his courage to speak truth to power, to be a voice for the voiceless, to really embody courageous leadership around change, to making sure that there was civil rights, human rights, and the sacrifice that he made both away from family and ultimately with his life. I think he is one of the most influential leaders that has ever graced the presence of our country, and so it is a privilege and honor to be asked to have remarks and reflection of his birthday and his legacy, and he is someone that I think people often underestimate him in his just "I have a dream" speech.
Right.
But Dr. King was
so much more
transformational, highly gifted and intelligent. And you look most of his speeches, he never even looked down.
Never.
But he knew both theology, but he also knew public policy. He knew philosophy, and he could frame things in a way that made the average person understand the most complex things about the law, about policy, and about change and transformation. And he also brought it to pass.
Yeah. And just so everybody has the information, by the time this airs, there'll be a couple days before the event. It's the 26th annual Grand Rapids Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Community Worship Celebration. Advocate, educate, and activate equals the dream is in action. Worship, music, arts, special video presentation. It's going to be January 15th, 6 p.m. at the Grand Rapids Christian High School. That's going to be at the DeVos Center for Arts and Worship, 2300 Plymouth Avenue, Southeast. And you can get more details. We'll make sure this is posted on our socials. Listen,
I got a shout out to Miss Williams too. She's the one. She's the one who extended the invitation to me, and so I appreciate her consideration.
Yes, definitely, and we appreciate all that she does in the community. Talking about another community leader. Back to this redevelopment now. You and I have talked offline about this, but I'm curious as to where I have thoughts. Plenty of people have thoughts. Developers, the community might even have thoughts, but. We recently got information from Grand Rapids Public Schools that they're going to put on the market the Kensington School. The caveat is that building has to be demolished, which now turns into a concern for developers because there's a cost for that because they can't use historic funds in order to preserve the building into a new use and then do what else would ever develop in the rest of the land and everything. So if you had a crystal ball, what you would love to see for the city and stuff, what would you like to see in that area for that piece of land?
You're putting me in a very sensitive spot here. But here's what I will say.
Yeah.
We, in a city that's built out like ours, the reuse of facilities is very important,
right.
Whether it's industrial or, in this case, an educational building for either a commercial or a residential purpose or some kind of mixed purpose where you have ground level retail and residential affordable housing preferably. I think the school district is going through a very intentional process. They've done their facility master plan. There's a newly elected leadership there as well, and the superintendent is providing good leadership in helping that board to think about the possible uses of some of the surplus property that they've identified. Kensington is one. There are other projects that are being considered in the area outside the school,
right?
That for redevelopment, and those projects are also getting the benefit of some of those incentives that I spoke about earlier to make it more affordable. So, in some instances, where if you thought that the only thing we could do is demolish it, because that's all your budget could afford, and it's cheaper to build brand new. But if there was a preservation effort, perhaps additional funding could be used to rehabilitate and address some of the environmental concerns that would not cost the developer, but it would be provided by some type of federal agent.
And so I meant to put you on the spot intentionally because I want you to mention that, because even though the state cannot step in for historic funds that usually have been used primarily to help, or the federal funds, I should say, to use that in order to preserve the buildings, in this case and stuff, there is a way to preserve the building because it, in a sense, for that neighborhood, for the most part, and one time for a long period of time was a landmark for that area and stuff. So the city does have the ability to step in and assist, right?
Well, again, I don't want to speak for GRPS,
Right.
and of course I've not been involved in their environmental assessment and how they've determined the best use of that property. I've not been directly responsible or involved in that. But for when you're talking an building asset, every building there is a possibility to renovate it. Look at the Amway Hotel. People
Yes.
had given up on that. Now it cost a lot of money, and you got to ask. There's a price for
Yes, right,
restoration.
right.
And where does it become unfeasible to do it? And so I am looking forward to seeing what the outcomes are and
Yes,
what decisions
yes.
they make. And if there's an opportunity for the city to partner, we're pretty clear that our focus is on creating both housing and employment opportunities and doing it in a way that creates affordability. And if there's a way that we can help with that, we certainly would try to leverage our influence in helping the school with that matter.
So as you can see, people, even if they're not directly involved or have any involvement whatsoever, there is, a thought, as always, progressive thought going on in the city of how we are going to address the many issues, and housing being one of them. And they have been doing it for years and years and years. And so I applaud them for just being true to that, recognizing the concern and not making it a challenge, but opportunity has always been the attitude at the city of Grand Rapids. We're talking to Mark Washington here on Community Voices. Lee Stevens sitting in for Pastor Lachey. Before we get into part two, I want to kind of land the plane where I believe this year could be what I believe to be a record-breaking year for Grand Rapids, because I see everything from all these different designations the city has been getting, awards and applaud for every single thing. One of the fastest growing cities. You name it, it's most livable cities. People are happy here when they, the 6% growth that you talked about as far as population, it's working. If there was a thing, service, or just in general that you think that could speak to that possibility of a record-breaking year for the city of Grand Rapids, what would that look like to you?
Well, let me put it in context. And since this is a spiritual station,
Yes.
You in Isaiah chapter 40, the prophet speaks about every valley being exalted and every mountain being brought down. And so in our city, you have peaks and valleys. And so there are a lot of things that we are doing right and we'll continue to do right. But there are some places that are low that need to be brought up, or there are things that are a little rough right now that it needs to be made smooth. And here recently, there's been a couple of conversations that have been rough conversations to have. One is around, and both of them involve public safety. One is around the unhoused, the people who are homeless. And the interesting thing about that, when you look at the numbers, there's 1,000 people roughly county-wide that are experiencing some type of episode of being unhoused over a year's time.
Yes.
And then there are about 50 or so people who, we have enough shelter for them. There's over 1,000 shelter beds. But there are about 50 or so people, for whatever reason, who have refused at night to go into shelter. Maybe they have mental health, they have addictions. They're not able to agree to the terms and conditions of places that they stay. And the data shows about 60% of those are people of color, primarily African American. So they're disproportionately represented. African Americans are roughly 19-20% of our community, and yet we're 3 times represented in the unhoused community. And so that's a challenge we're going to have to address, because as you grow, and particularly as you have more tourism, we have big events like Art Prize. You have 500,000 people coming to our city. For some people who've been in Chicago and they've been in New York and they've been in LA, they come to Grand Rapids and say, there's really not a prevalent homeless issue like there are in other cities, but from other people who are coming in from some of the rural areas or other area township villages, and this is the biggest city that they've ever seen in. It is sticker shock to them. I didn't know this was part of what was happening. So that's rough. The police conversation, particularly after the officer involved shooting and murder of Patrick Lyoya, and we have the upcoming trial in March, and even though that's not under the jurisdiction of the city to determine the outcome of that, that's something we continue to, like many other cities, try to navigate through as a community. And those are some of the things as we grow, this conversation around public safety, both for and public health for the unhoused community, as well as good community policing with our new police chief that we're coming in, making sure that there's a good relationship between officers and the residents is going to be very important.
Well, it's definitely, and I think part 2, we can lead into that because that's a good discussion to start off part 2. So as you can see, we got a lot of stuff we want to tackle and get you involved in as a community. So we're going to do a part 2. This is kind of impromptu, but I think it's warranted. Lee Stevens in for Pastor Lachey. Community Voices. Part 2 is coming up, and just stay tuned because we got more to talk about.
You've been listening to Community Voices with your host, Terrence Lachey. Community Voices can be heard every Friday at 12 noon. This radio roundtable features community, business, and religious leaders that discuss current events and topics that impact our urban community. If you would like to be a guest, or if you have a suggested topic, contact the station today at 616-259-7342. Until next week, let your voice be heard in the community.